Hey, everybody, welcome to the Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. On the Hard Sell, we're covering all aspects of sales, as sales is hard, and we're trying to bring leading experts to you to help you get better results no matter what your sales outcomes are that you're trying to pursue. And today we got a great guest on the show. We've got Jason Smith from Klue. Jason is a five-time entrepreneur, and Klue is his latest startup that I'll have him talk a little bit more about it, but they bring all sorts of competitive information to bear to your company so you can make better decisions and arm all of your company really with better intelligence to drive better decisions in how you relate to the world as it relates to competition. And Jason's got a really interesting story. We're going to get into it a lot, but without further ado, Jason, welcome to the show, and maybe just introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joel. Well, thank you. You did a nice introduction. I like that. Maybe the only other thing I'll say is this one is working, and I've had plenty of failure in my five-time startup career as well. But this one makes a lot of sense because there's companies that have competitors. Every company has competitors, and every company needs some system of record to stay on top of what those competitors are doing.
Yeah, and when you say working, I think you guys just raised quite a bit of additional capital, right? Did I see that?
Yeah, and timing wise, in hindsight, it looks great because we closed it in October. It was a $62 million round led by Tiger Global and Salesforce Ventures. And then very next month, NASDAQ started to take a nosedive. So we're glad to get that funding round in and fully fueled up to continue to accelerate.
Yeah, make it count. Well, great. So a lot to sort of cover here. I guess you made I think probably the salient point first here, which is like everybody has competition, and I think we often know who our competitors are. The ones that come up in deals or that we hear about or that bid on our keywords or whatever it ends up being. But for somebody to go from this idea of like I know competition exists to I'm going to make a concerted effort to compete more intelligently, and I'm going to invest in a system like a Klue. I'm curious, like what is the data out there that basically suggests that making an investment in understanding the competition better is actually that's a good investment to make, and like or how should somebody think about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's the way I look at the data side is kind of two levels. There's a macro picture and there's a micro picture. The macro picture are just trends that are hitting all of us in every market. So competition we know is increasing. I love the Martech stack, view that I forget what it was. CSO Insights, maybe Chief Martech, put out a report every year looking at the number of Martech companies. I think 7 years ago there were 300. 8,000 plus today. That's happening across every industry. More and more competition. It's being discussed more and more at the board level. Certainly, salespeople are seeing it day to day. Then there's this like disruption that's happening. And so Capgemini did a study where they talked about 72% of enterprises believing that they're vulnerable to some level of disruption over the next couple of years, and that over 54% of CMOs think that competition is going to come from somewhere outside their current industry. So I think what we're seeing macro wise is just a lot more competition, a lot more fear of that competition. And then maybe one other trend that we all know of in sales is like everyone's doing the research before they actually approach you, right? Multiple vendors are being engaged before you talk to a seller. That was a CSO Insights one where at least 50% are doing that. So that's kind of a macro trend that's affecting everybody. On the micro side, I think the way that we look at it at Klue is, on a per company level. Look at the cohorts of salespeople that might use competitive intelligence, competitive enablement inside their company versus those that don't. And then how do we look at deal cycles and attaching to revenue that impact of using that competitive insight? So for Klue, on the micro level, we look at three things. Like, does the win rate against competitors change? Forget about the no decisions. We can't do a lot there. But mostly about competitive head-to-heads, the dogfight deals. Are we helping impact the win rate there? The other one that we look at is deal size. So discounting. In a highly competitive deal, you end up discounting a lot more. So if you can mitigate the competitor earlier, you might be able to have a higher deal size. And then the last thing that we look at is days to close. How quickly are deals closing? And again, mitigate the competitor earlier, generally you're going to close faster. It's not a long, prolonged dogfight. So those three things really vary depending on the company that you're talking to. Like we've seen win rates on a competitive basis increase by 34%. And you do that across how many deals that they're doing on their ACVs, that can be hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. Deal sizes tend to be affected slightly less, but we've seen as much as 12% increase in deal size, not increase, higher average deal size when you
Hmm.
knocked your competitor out earlier. And then in terms of time to close, that one's a harder one. We've seen a couple of days, depending on more of a transactional deal, or as much as 2 weeks for a more kind of high involvement deal cycle. So think of it macro, micro, and there's a lot of data to support that this is working.
Yeah, and do you think about, you mentioned sort of cohorts of reps, like do you think of it as you've got within maybe a sales team, a set of reps that are using it a lot versus not using a lot, or is it more like, okay, we just were onboarded a new set of reps and they were onboarded using, like they now know how to use this tech versus like the ones that have been here for 3 years, like they don't care and like they're not into it, and so now we see the new ones ramping much faster than the old ones, or
Certainly, there's okay. So there's a couple things I'll break down there. First, let me talk about kind of where salespeople absorb. Certainly, when you come in to any new role, you're absorbing the market. So any new rep is pouring over the competitive profiles and the data that you'd have in Clue at your company. That one's really beneficial. And then, as you said, you become a pro, you've done 100 deals, then you're less inclined to look at that. For those folks, they're not going to absorb the whole thing. They're looking for the delta. What's changed?
mm,
What's new? How do they get surprised? I used to beat them up because they're not enterprise savvy. Oh, they're now SOC 2 compliant. Here's the press
mm,
release, and they've just got permission. So you better not talk about that one anymore. And in
mm.
fact, in my previous company, it was about a 500-person SaaS company. We had 100 salespeople, and I literally sat on calls where these educated prospects would correct us about what the prospect or what the competitor could and couldn't do. And
Mm,
we would start to, our salespeople, we'd be making false claims. And then that kind of mitigated trust in the deal, which we think impacted the deal, which was the precursor to me starting Clue. How do we fix that?
mm,
So, definitely we saw in the old days, markets weren't moving fast enough for the need to stay on top of it. Today, just disruptions happening faster. People are adding more, definitely in the B2B tech space. So even the 3 year in, I know everything reps are dipping in every now and again, particularly when they get surprised with an educated prospect.
or does it take like a high profile blow up, like you've had this deal on the forecast for like three consecutive monthly updates or quarterly or whatever, and then all of a sudden you lose at the last minute and then you look like you don't look so good.
Oh, you nailed it. That's it. It's always what happens. And it's when you get shocked, right? Like you're crushing it. And then all of a sudden a prospect's like, hey, what about this? I'm going with somebody else for these reasons. And then you're scrambling to figure out why. And that's where compete ends up coming in. And so then you don't screw it up for the next deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if this is true for you. I mean, certainly a big part of our customer base is other tech companies, and it just seems like the pace of capabilities is changing. Like especially with like very large venture capital rounds and innovation around software development. Like it seems like it's getting really hard to keep up. Not only are there more people, but those people are changing more quickly now than they used to.
Totally. I view it a bit like, if you're a football fan, a bit like 1950s football compared to today's Super Bowl. In the 50s, you're an offensive team, a defensive team. You go out, you run your plays regardless of what the other team was doing. Now it's headset based, play by play reaction based on what they're doing. And I think B2B business, B2B deals are going to go that way as well. There's going to be playbooks that you're going to need to adapt in the moment in specific deals, not even per specific month or specific year. It'll be like Motorola headset kind of inputs on, this is how you need to adapt based on what the competitor is doing in a particular deal. And it's only going to get more and more competitive. It's easier to start companies. Bigger companies are constantly looking for new opportunities and are going to kind of, if they're not competing directly, going to fud it with a lot of kind of, oh, we could do part of that. And it creates kind of budget blur.
Hmm.
So my belief is this is something that'll just be part of the stack for every salesperson and CS people too. We're seeing more CS people because guess what salespeople do? They talk to your client or existing clients and try and get that business. And so a lot of CS people are using battle cards and insights to understand how to sniff when their client is talking to a competitor and what to do when they figure that out.
Yeah, and if I'm a salesperson or a CSM at a company, and maybe my company has just started to invest in this, or even you're in a period where it's like you haven't made it as specific an investment in this tech, but somebody started a Google sheet or whatever it ends up being, is like you're starting to kind of get organized. Like, what's the responsibility of the rep to make sure that they're not just, and I'm sort of guessing that there's a two-way responsibility here. Like, part of it is like you're a consumer of the information, but when you, it's sort of like when if you see something, say something, kind of a thing. Like, how does the, like, what do the best organizations do as far as getting information out from the world back into the company where it can be useful?
So it's interesting. So our market, we generally serve salespeople as the consumer of the content, but the product marketing departments generally create the content. They crave the knowledge that salespeople have. Salespeople are the tip of the spear. They hear from the market every single day, 10 times a day. Why are you different than? They get little inputs. So, product marketers, the marketing team are desperate for your input. They're desperate for that. But guess what? We're busy selling in sales. So there's not a lot of time to be giving a lot of that input. The beautiful thing is we're starting to see more and more collaborative sharing, starting with like Slack and Teams. People have just put more and more stuff in there. Hey, I heard this. I came across this. Does anybody have any input? And then salespeople are kind of almost self sharing to help them get deals in Slack and Teams. We'll try and pick that up and put it over into kind of the system of record that is Clue. The other thing that we're seeing is, gong calls. They're all, the Zoom call is recorded now
Mhm.
and converted to text, and we can start to mine that without having to bug the rep. We could just pick up what they were saying in those deals when they got asked, or a prospect shared something that was interesting that might not end up in the Slack channel, but actually is in the gong call. The other thing that we've recommended is like not every salesperson's going to be hungry to share, but there's always a couple keeners that are the ones that are posting a lot. So, if you're one of those, be part of a small advisory team that can help the product marketers not just find that intel that's sifting around the sales team that they might not have access to, but also actually help the product marketers write in a way that the salespeople will actually digest it. A big problem that you've seen out of product marketers is they'll put like a battle card or they'll put a lot of information about a competitor together that it's like a textbook. It's a
Mhm.
library of stuff, and the salesperson's not going to read that. They need tight, digestible little hits. And if they need more, they could go down that iceberg beneath the water and find more. That is something that product marketers and marketers generally need a sales input. Hey, I'd never read that. My team would never read that. This is how we'd say it. So, a little advisory group is something that we put together, and those salespeople kind of get the inside edge to help the broader group. And the last thing I'd say is, the best companies are doing feedback all the time, like salespeople being blunt instead of silent about what's missing, what's wrong, how to write it, that language. And it could be as simple as dropping a post it note on a battle card or providing input in Slack. But just, instead of being silent, the more that you share, this is missing, this is not up to date, but leave it to the marketing team to update it, the better that repository of information is going to be, and the better you're going to have the info that you need to win the dogfight deal.
Yeah. Is there a case of where, and you can maybe talk a little bit about the difference between like having the intelligence and kind of using it, like intelligence versus enablement? But is it like, can there be too much knowledge? Like, could you know too much about your competitors, where like then you start to just obsess and you forget about, like how do you strike that balance?
That's a good. So our original tagline was "We obsess about your competitors, so you don't have to." Look, customers win. Customer is where you need to focus, but I think you want to be competitor aware, customer obsessed. You want to know everything possible about your competitor. You just don't want to obsess about that. So my view is knowledge is power, and gather it, organize it, make it digestible. So yeah, there's a the term that's sticking right now in the industry is competitive enablement. More and more people are calling themselves competitive enablement managers. They're thinking of it as actionable. I think in the old world it was intelligence competitive. It was like a database that
Hmm.
one librarian would go and look up the information and would be the single pivot point of the competitive knowledge. Now it's about that person leveraging what sales knows, what CS knows, what the market knows, what's happening in turn, and actually creating a field network of intelligence that have multiple nodes everywhere. And that means enabling a sales team. That means enabling a CS team, a marketing team, a strategy team. So yeah, I think it's got to be actionable, and that gets back to the digestibility of it, the relevance of it, where you find it. You shouldn't have to go back to even a platform like Clue. You should be able to access that in Slack,
Yeah.
maybe a feed in Gone, maybe certainly in Salesforce at the opportunity level. We have a little browser extension that's really popular. People just want to actually access it while they're in the flow of, oh, I got an email that triggers something, and they just want to access it right there. So context matters, digestibility matters, relevance and matters, and that's what enablement means versus just having some separate repository sitting there that nobody accesses.
Yeah, it's interesting that that concept of a of sort of a specialist in this area, which I'm not as familiar with. Does that person look sort of like a combination between like a more traditional sales enablement person and a product marketer, or is it like more of like a sales coach and a product
Yeah.
marketer? Like what is that
when
person's
we
skill
do
set?
when we do our deals, it's we normally have like sales, a CRO sitting at the table going, okay, if this is going to help my sellers, I'm in, but I don't want to do any of the work. And then they're
Hmm.
looking at product marketing. Typically 80% of the time we see product marketers in the bigger companies, like the Dells and the Ciscos, and the ADPs. They have like floors of competitive intelligence people that their
Yeah.
entire job is to curate this mountain of data across hundreds of competitors.
Hmm.
So, but most companies aren't like that. Most companies have product marketers doing the job. Sales enablement. So, product marketers I think of as like they need to get all the inputs of why am I unique in the market? Why am I different? And package that up so that salespeople can actually use it. So they need that sales voice in there. Good product marketers have that sales voice and aren't just doing cover your ass content. The other group is sales enablement, which generally we find aren't the ones doing the content. They're the lever controls for which tools people use. And so I think of sales as the consumer, product marketing slash competitive enablement people as the developer curator of the content, and sales enablement as thou shalt not give my salespeople another tool, make it accessible in the tools
Hmm.
they want.
Right. Right. Yeah, we certainly hear that. I mean, I think as you look at the sort of the modern tech sales stack today, there's a lot of pieces to it, and there's quite a number of reps that at least we hear from customers and folks that we know that like one of the reasons the rep fails is because they actually couldn't get over the overcome the tech stack complexity, which is not a great. We got enough problems in selling without that being another one.
No one wants another tool for sure, but interestingly, they want the information that some of those tools have. And so our premise is, a central system of record for those product marketers and competitive enablement people to dive into. And then when they update something, it's pushed out to all the spots that a salesperson would live in, whether that's their browser in Chrome or Gmail, or whether that's in a sales enablement tool, or whether that's Salesforce, or whether that's Gone. We just want it to be wherever they need it. Salespeople, like like they'll only use it when they need it, when they get their ass kicked, when it's asked
Mm,
about, when they don't have a good answer, when they're first onboarding. So you just have to make it really easy and digestible and relevant when it's there, and then they're good. Then that helps push over a couple deals. We'll attach, the usage of that content to those deals, and then we can see, are the people that are using it making a difference versus those that are not. It's pretty clear over time what that looks like.
yeah, and for some of your customers where this is well adopted and the sales team is contributing and there's sort of a good back and forth. Do you actually see it change the way the company operates in the sense that like maybe different product decisions are made or the way that they
Totally.
sort of consider the next steps are different than they maybe would have before they did something like this?
Totally. So again, back to that competitor aware, not obsessed, customer obsessed, competitor aware. What happens is it just becomes light little touches instead of these monster annual efforts of updating out of date stuff. It's light little touches. I found that little thing, flick it into Clue, something updates, somebody needs it, it comes back. So the whole organization just becomes a little more nimble and aware of what's going on. Okay, they just launched a new AI feature. Is it any good? What's G2 say about that? What are our prospects saying about that that might appear in a Slack conversation? What do we get on their press release? What do we get on their webpage change? You need something to bring all that together, but nobody wants all of that and sales. They just want the bullet point that might lead to the next layer that need to show to a prospect. So the trick is bring it all together and then be able to push it back to the edges of the organization in a light digestible way, and the only way you can do that is if everybody's doing like a little bit of help. It's like, many hands make light work.
Mhm.
That's exactly what happens here. Everybody chips in. Hey, I found this thing, and whether they drop that directly in Clue or in Slack or it's a gong call, like just keep talking about it, keep sharing it, and then the right system and product marketer will convert that into something you can use in your deals, and it definitely makes a difference. Like we have hundreds of clients, and I'd say there's only maybe I'm going to say 6 clients where we haven't seen an impact of competitive helping them in the dogfight deals. Again,
Mhm.
it's the competitive head-to-head ones where you just need a little bit of edge. And here's the thing, Joel, like today's sales, like you don't lose by some massive margin. It's not you don't get crushed. You lose
Mhm.
by like a percentage point. It's like, I kind of liked you, but I just tipped over to the other one. That's the razor of margin that you want to win on. And sometimes having that little bit of insight around your competitors is going to make the difference.
And so if I'm a hotshot, sales leader or sales manager, and I'm evaluating the next opportunity, should I be asking questions about like, what's your competitive intelligence? Like, oh, actually, I want to go interview the product marketing person in a reverse interview because if that person isn't good, then like my job gets a lot harder.
I would definitely ask about the sales materials and, broadly, and then dive into the competitive set. Tell me what you know about your competitors. When's the last time this thing has been updated? Are people using it? Can you attach that to revenue? Like a couple of those questions, like it's pretty clear if an organization is sophisticated on that front and equipping its sellers well, or leaving you to kind of wing it and shoot in the dark and have a prospect correct you and lose deals.
Right, right. Well, last question here. We could talk about this probably for hours and hours, but we try to keep it to more of a drive time format. And this is one that it maybe is a selfish question in the sense that yes, where we're more of a product led growth company, and so you talked a little bit earlier about this concept of people getting a lot of it. People get much more information now than they used to. They may be trying a product first. They may try a bunch of products. They may drink deeply from the well of your website information. And so, is it different in? Does competitive intelligence play a different role in those PLG type emotions versus a top down? And like how so if it does?
It definitely does. I mean, today Clue specifically focuses on B2B sales led motions, right? So the entire product is geared towards that. Tons of demand for PLG and typically smaller companies, like once you reach a certain size in the PLG world, you're using those product leads to convert with salespeople into bigger enterprise deals. So
Yeah.
usually you get bigger, you're going to see a sales team. But generally, the answer to that is we have a huge demand for smaller companies, kind of sub 150 person companies. And today, we don't have the ML for the magic button that those companies really need, to be frank.
Mm,
What we have is something that will be a massive assist for a product marketer curator to do their job ultra efficiently, monitor 10x the competitors or go deeper, but you still need somebody on that
mhm,
inside to contextualize it. In a pure PLG world, what I see is a lot of folks that it might orient their marketing, it might orient some of their sales material, it might orient some of the CS, but because you don't have a seller in there trying to navigate the deal, it tends to be more what's outward facing on the website and the content, which tends to be more marketing led, which tends to be I'm not going to spend a lot of time actually curating for anybody else. It's just me and my database, and I just need, little bits of insight, and I don't want to do a lot of work. And so that world, I think, ultimately will open up as ML gets better and better. We've invested millions in ML, but to create that magic button that says, "Here's the magic insight that you need to change your content," without somebody on the inside driving it, is still a really hard problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I imagine you guys will solve it over time. So we'll look forward to that.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Uh, all right, that's great. Well, thanks again for taking time to show up on the hard sell. If people want to learn more about Clue, or they want to be in touch or follow what you guys are doing over there, what's the best way to do that?
Obviously, klue.com, clue with K, clue with a C. Joel was taken.com. Can you believe
Uh,
that? Yeah, I
huh.
was surprised, but
Is it the
clue.com.
board game or is it something else?
Actually, no, it's a developer who registered in 1994 and successfully fought off Hasbro in a court case
Wow.
to keep the domain. Yeah, there was no chance he was going to sell it. But clue.com with a K we've got, and the website's got everything. And then, if anyone wants to talk to me directly, you could drop me an email at jason@clue.com.
Great. Okay. Well, that's Clue. That's competitive intelligence. Jason, thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Joel.